They were not, okay.
Leaving it early to take it for the doctor.
All right. You've all received the minutes. We made some changes to the minutes. They weren't major. I think the only substantive change was your comments about what Randy said. That we changed it so that you acquired with the various, leagues, the sport leagues, concerning the organizations using their interest in using the fields and the gymnasium of the new school. Only the YMCA expressed interest in the new gym, especially if it were middle school size.
And I have those changes here. So I'll incorporate those if
So that
we could have a motion
amendment,
to...
are there any other changes? Seeing none, could I have a motion to approve as amended? Thank you. All right, so our first order of business and most important is a review. Good morning, Kemp.
Good morning.
Review of all of the work that was done under the title programming, which was basically taking the ed specs and going through them all bit by bit and working through what changes were recommended and what the implications were for sizing and of that nature. And we had 3 programming meetings, and I've distributed to the committee, and hopefully anybody who hasn't got them, I've got copies here of the last presentation, the minutes of the last meeting, of the programming meeting, and also the summary of the recommended changes. And I'll let you take it away.
All right, thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kemp Morhart with Slam Collaborative, for those that I haven't met yet or haven't seen in a while. I'm going to just run through a brief summary of our findings during the program verification phase of the project. As Kip mentioned, we conducted 3 meetings during that, I think it was June 12th through July 11th. And what you have in front of you, a small packet, includes the final space program that we arrived at. And then behind that is a summary of the changes proposed to the ed specs. And then behind that is our last presentation. I believe all of this was distributed electronically before your last meeting. At least this one was.
Yes.
These 2 were not. And so in my slide deck today, I have the full version of this show. If anybody wants to go and look at a particular slide in more detail, we can do that. But I thought I would kind of keep it as a summary for the first few slides, and then we can dive into the details if you so are inclined. But before we dive into the slides, the space program is 3 pages. We've organized it into categories that we typically categorize space in: administration, special ed, academics, art and music, library and media center, food service, physical education, and then maintenance and operations. You'll note that there are some lines that are highlighted in peach color. Those represent the early learning program components of the overall space program. And over on the far right-hand side of the page, we have a breakout between the elementary school program and the ELP program, so you can kind of track the area for each program separately. And that's going to become more important as we go back to the state and they ask for a square footage for the building that's being contributed to the ELP program, and then they also ask for the contribution for the full day K program. So we break that out to track that separately.
And I should add, Kemp, the reason for that is there's a potential for getting a special bonus grant for the ELP program. So therefore, it's not just the classroom space, but it's all of the supporting space you want to keep track of.
Correct.
When we go back to the state.
One of the first things we did as part of the program verification, we always like to have a visioning session with the group to make sure that we identify and establish a set of goals for the project. So as we get further into the design, we can always come back to this set of goals, make sure that we're going down the right road and the development of the design is staying true to these initial goals. So I'll go through these. First and foremost, to create a vibrant and inviting building, to gather students, family, and the Darien community while implementing security and design measures to zone the building and campus for each use. On the right-hand side of the page, we've started to identify how we're addressing these goals with the design, and that side will get further populated as we move forward into the design phases. But at this point in time, we've identified large gathering spaces to support the academic as well as community use, and we'll get into that a little bit more with the gymnasium and some of the other larger spaces. Second goal is to develop a system of dynamic learning environments that engages each learner type and can transform as teaching tools and methodologies evolve. So that's kind of a fancy way of saying build in flexibility to the building to be able to allow it to adapt over time. Some of the strategies that we have identified so far are providing learning corridor spaces for flex teaching areas out near the classroom space, and I'll get into that in a little more detail when I go through the programming summary. Providing 2 additional DLC flex classrooms that accommodate an enrollment bubble, but also address the special ed need for the district-wide DLC program. And we can go into that in a little bit more detail in a minute. And then sizing the classrooms to incorporate the technology and the flexible use with multiple adults in the room. And that's important as we have more and more paraprofessionals coming into the classroom, and you just need a little bit more flexible space, a little bit more room to work. So the 900 square foot classrooms prevailed throughout. We had a little bit of discussion during that. Do we cut those back a little bit to save overall area? But the committee decided that we're going to keep it as defined in the ed spec moving forward. Third goal, provide a campus and facility that incorporates the sustainable measures that meets or exceeds Connecticut high performance building standards. That is to be incorporated as we start into the design phase. We do have a long list of checklist items that we need to go through. There are some that are prerequisites that we must do, and then there are some that are optional that we can work together as a group to determine what initiatives that we want to go after to achieve the Connecticut high performance standards. Fourth goal is develop environments that support active learning, incorporate technology, equipment, movement, flexibility, and capacity for the projected enrollment of 578. And we're doing that largely by providing the 1,000 square foot ELP classrooms, 1,000 square foot K classrooms, and maintaining those elementary classrooms at 900 square feet, as I mentioned. One of the more unique approaches that we've discussed with the group is to distribute some of the learning, some of the media center space allocation into this learning corridor concept, where we have a small allocation of the media center space that can be allocated either in the corridors or adjacent to the classroom pods, which are grouped by grade level. And so they have some outside the classroom space that's immediately adjacent to their kind of neighborhood of classrooms that will allow for breakout for reading sessions and other smaller group or individual type activities. And then in the library media center itself, creating an exploration zone. Any questions on any of this?
In the fourth goal, do you have room, does that incorporate room for expansion beyond the 578?
It does, and some of that is built into the space program itself, because I have it on the slide deck, but it's a hidden slide. We did a classroom count and a seat count as we went through it, and right now we're providing 520 seats in I think it's the grades 1 through 5 level classrooms for, I believe it was 380 students. I'll bring the slide up and we can look at it together. But so there's some expansion built in strictly to the space program because you have more seat capacity. But then when we look at the planning on site, we also have strategies for expanding the building as well. Any other questions on this before we move on? So this is a graphic of the full space program. So everything that's on this tallied sheet is represented graphically here. It's intended to represent a relative size, but they are all just squares for the most part. That's not how it's going to be in the end, but it's just a good way of graphically seeing all the bits and pieces of the space program. And I put some labels on these. So we have the early learning program, where we have the 10 early learning program classrooms and the 10 associated restrooms with those classrooms. There's a small administrative contingent that is strictly based, is dedicated to the early learning program. We have the commons space and then a few other support spaces for that. Then we have the main administration, and that's It's tallied up here, all those individual spaces. Physical education, we did make a change, and we'll go through that in detail, to take the space allocation for the learning commons and add it to the space allocation for the original space allocation for the gym, to sum those together, and then we actually added a little bit more to get a full-size middle school basketball court sized gym. That was a decision that the group made. And then there are a couple support spaces for the physical education. Visual and performing arts, we have music classrooms and art classrooms. Then the academics, grades K through 5, we have 4 K classrooms of 1,000 square feet with supporting restrooms. And then 18 general classrooms, grades 1 through 5, with a couple of support spaces, and that's balanced out by those 2 additional DLC classrooms under special ed. And so those 2 additional DLCs are going to act as flex. So if you have a grade level bubble, and these DLC classrooms are also going to be in the layout distributed amongst the other classrooms. So you're not going to have all DLC concentrated in one area of the building. They'll be distributed throughout. So you can manage those enrollment bubbles as they come through. Just by repurposing the rooms. All of the rooms are sized the same, so they can be very flexible in that regard. Then we have the OTPT room, and then a series of resource rooms and some administrative space for rounding out the special ed. Food service is largely a dining space, a kitchen, and a receiving and storage type space. And this dining area is designed to handle 3 lunchways of 2 grades per way. Library Media Center, as I mentioned, we've got this component here is the Library Media Center proper, which consists of 2 larger spaces, 1 reading and 1 stacks, some support spaces. And then these 6 smaller boxes represent those distributed Media Center learning zones that are going to be distributed around the building floor plate in the neighborhood of the academic classrooms. So it's kind of a distributed approach. And I think that's an exciting new trend and new way of planning educational facilities that will help enliven the academic experience for the kids. And then we tally up the maintenance and operations. We have a custodial storage area. We have overall building storage. We do have also a receiving area and janitorial spaces, and that just kind of, as well as a main lobby. That's the big box there. So we always want to program that main lobby so it doesn't get lost when we start to develop a building. You need to have that main space, and it may take a different shape. It could be part of the corridor system and so forth, but we do want to have that space allocation so we don't lose that in the overall building. So the initial ed spec summarized is a total of 64,849 square feet is where we started with the ed spec. And that net square feet, NSF, stands for net square feet. That's the actual program space. So that's like the area within the walls of the room. And then we gross that whole building up with a target efficiency for the overall building of about 62%. And that gross up factor accounts for the thickness of the walls, the thickness of the outside of the walls, restrooms, electrical closets, corridors, all that stuff that helps you, that is part of laying out a building. And that is where we arrive at the 104,500 square feet for the overall size of the building. Now that's to the outside of the exterior wall. And for those of you that may or may not know about how the state measures a building, they measure to the inside of the outside wall. So we usually take about 5% off of that number. Usually it's about where it lands in the end. And that would be the size of the building that's reported to the state. So it's probably going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 100,000 square feet if you were using your ed spec.
Is most of the difference between what the ed spec was and the later figure, the increase in the physical education space?
Partly. We also increased the health suite and a few of the smaller offices because of the way they the space wants to be used. There were some offices that were 150 square feet, and we'll go through that in detail. But the functions within that space were to have a desk, but also a table with 4 chairs to facilitate a small group education activity and/or a conference with parents. So some of those spaces got bumped up to 180, and so some of those accumulated adds are what contributed to where we are today of a net square footage of 68,150. Now, these numbers may not exactly jive with my summary. My summary is more accurate. But it's like about 110 square feet off, I think, between the two numbers. So we'll get that sorted out when Amy gets back from vacation. But essentially, we're at about 68.3, I believe, is what's on this page here. And that's going to translate to just under 110,000 square foot building. So then if we back off that 5%, it'll be about 105, 105.5 being reported to the state for the size of the building. And again, that 62% efficiency is where we start. As we lay out a building, we tend to increase that efficiency. So it may bump up to 63, 64, and then so that will bring that number down. And so we're always looking to minimize the area that you're building and maximize the layout. Any questions on this?
I should add that during that process, we had the input of Luke and actually one of your kindergarten teachers all along the way, so we had the source right here rather than guessing at it.
Correct. Thank you for that. Yeah, you're right. And we had advisory from ELP to make sure that we were addressing those spaces properly, as well as kindergarten and other administrative functions. The next couple of slides are simply just clips of what's in front of you. So if anybody has any questions on the tallied space program, we can talk about that in detail. But as I mentioned, the orange lines are a breakout of the early learning program. And then the same values that are carried in this column are just broken out into 2 separate columns to track early learning program and elementary program separately. So if there are no questions on any of this, I'm going to skip forward to the summary of revisions to the ed specs. So earlier this week, I put together this spreadsheet that tallies up. You've got the first 2 columns. We have a back reference to the ed spec page where the space is identified.
Copy of this?
Yep.
Okay.
And that's important because we'll always want to be able to go back and refer back to what was originally identified. And I also will say that this spreadsheet is only listing the things that have been modified from the ed spec. If it's not on this list, it hasn't been modified. So as I mentioned earlier, the school psychologist office was originally identified as a space at 150 square feet. Working through the group, we changed that to 180 square feet, and then we also added one additional school psychologist office into the space program because we learned during that process that there was another full-time employee that was hired and anticipated for the building. So that net change from the ed spec is a plus 210 square feet. Next line item, principal's office was identified in the ed spec for 200 square feet. We reduced that to 150 square feet. And similarly, we reduced and Luke offered that up.
Nice job, Luke.
So,
Take one for the team.
similarly, the assistant principal was at 180 and is now at 150 as well.
Fix that later.
In the ELP program, the security monitor workstation was identified in the ed spec narratively, but it did not have a numerical value assigned to it. And we wanted to make sure that we captured that as a space rather than just assuming it's going to be in a corridor somewhere, because that's not necessarily the best way to lay out a building. So we identified an area of 60 square feet for that function. Staff workroom we had, the ed spec had one at 150 square feet, and the group agreed that we'd be better off with two for that, and having them distributed throughout the building would serve the staff and faculty better that way. So, and plus, because we were talking about a two-story building where we would have some classrooms on the lower level, it would make sense to have two workrooms. So that was a net add of 150 square feet. The lactation room, again, was narratively described in the ed spec, but there was no numerical value set for that, so we added a 60 square foot room for that. The health room is where we added quite a bit. 475 square feet was identified, and that would probably be close to okay for just the K-5 facility, but because it's being shared between K-5 and ELP, we increased it to 775. To add, we can go to that page and I can show you what the individual spaces were added. I kind of grouped the health room together, but there's a more detailed breakdown in the detail slides, so we'll go there after this and just look at that. Special ed, speech and language therapy rooms. Again, we had the ed spec had 350 square foot areas identified, and those got bumped up to 180 because of that need to have a small table and 4 chairs within that space to facilitate either educational activity or conference activity within those rooms. Resource room, learning center. We had 6 at 6 at 150 square feet for a total of 900, and those also got bumped up to 180. So that was a net add of 180 overall over 6 spaces. The Developmental Learning Center classroom, the DLC. We originally had 2 at 900 square feet, and that's where we decided to allocate a total of 4 for that. And we basically borrowed, and you'll see that later on down the page, we borrowed from the original program 20 academic classrooms, and we just reassigned them to Developmental Learning Center, which will be important as we go back to the state because it's supporting a district-wide special ed program. And so that's going to help us when we have that conversation of why are you building so many classrooms and why do you have so many seats for X number of students. That's going to be an important point to make to them, that it's actually supporting a district-wide special ed program. Speech and language therapy room, similarly, went from 150 to 180 for 3 spaces, and then the same for the gifted education room, because they were all being used in that same way with an in-room small conference table. Any questions on special ed? So special ed was one of the areas where we increased the most. So if you look at the summary on that subcategory, we increased that area by about 2,190 square feet.
And if I could just add, I think part of the result of that increase was that conversations with Luke and discussions about how, once again, this is a district-wide program that beyond just supporting Oxbridge students, there are students that come from each district to Oxbridge, so there's a need for a little bit more space and a larger program than originally anticipated.
Correct.
But
Okay,
also,
about you.
the numbers should be looked at in tandem to the net sum, with the academics.
Right. Academics, the world language room was originally programmed at 1,000 square feet. We agreed that 900 would be sufficient for that space, and it would also allow that space to be sized the same as the classrooms, which would help with laying out the building, and it would also help with that flexibility aspect of the building, where any one of those spaces can be set up as a classroom, and you can move that world language room around the building if you wanted to, as programs develop. Academic classrooms, we mentioned, was originally programmed at 20, and we shifted 2 of those to the district-wide learning centers, and so that's the corresponding 1,800 square foot trade-off that went up to the special ed line. So not a whole lot of change in the academic category. Any questions on that? art and music, general music classroom was originally programmed at 1,000. Again, similar to the world language room, we reduced that to 900 for a lot of the same reasons. 900 is very sufficient for that type of activity for the number of students that are going to be in that space. You're going to have plenty of room for the activities there. We did also increase the music storage room from 80 to 200 square feet based on our experience. That's going to be more appropriate for what you need to do with that space. Instrumental music room was originally programmed at 1,000 square feet, but we learned during the process that smaller groups are taking instrumental instruction at a time, and 1,000 square feet would have been a tremendously large room for the number of students that were going to be instructed at one time. So we reduced that to 400. And then the instrumental storage was originally programmed at 100, and we moved that up to 400, not only because of the quantity of instruments that are intended to be stored there, but also we matched that with the instrumental music room size, so those rooms can actually work in tandem, and they can have instruments stored around the perimeter, and each room can be used as an instructional space. Rather than having a dedicated storage room and one instructional space, they can have two instructional spaces with distributed storage. And I think that's going to work a lot better for the operations of the building. The art room was originally programmed at 1,200. We were able to reduce that a little bit. Again, based on our experience, we brought sample layouts to the group and proved out that that doesn't need to be quite that large. So we were able to pick up a little bit of savings there. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the common room seating, the 1,500 square feet common room, that space allocation was shifted to the gymnasium. And so in the final ed spec, that common room goes away, and that space is shifted to the gymnasium. Library Media Center, I left it on this list and just put a note that there were no changes from the ed spec. Just want to make that clear. Food service, very minor changes. We just added 62 square feet to the lunchroom, and that was it. And that was simply based on a calculation that we do when we do space programming. I think it's 16 square feet per student, and the number of students for 2 grades, I believe it was 152, something like that was the number. That's just how the math worked out, so it was just kind of carrying that forward. Again, as I mentioned earlier, the dining area is sized for 3 waves of 2 grades per wave. Physical education was the biggest change. The original program was 2,700 square feet. We're now going to carry 5,200 square feet, and that will allow for a junior high striped court, which is a 42-foot by 74-foot basketball court with 10 feet of overrun on each end, 3 feet of overrun on one side, and 7 on the other side. And the 7 on the one side allows for a scorer's table and team seats on one side. So that will be a community asset as well as a school asset. We're also planning on putting a space divider, a roll-up divider curtain down the middle of that gym, so you can have 2 distinct PE teaching spaces within that space.
Kemp, we should probably also look at this as, while it says an increase of 2,500 square feet, we're actually putting the common room seating over there. So if we,
correct,
the 1,900, really increasing our total space by 600 in the big picture.
Correct. I'll add that note.
I'm
to
just,
your remarks.
just as a,
Oh, got it.
I mean, look,
Yep.
2,500 looks like a lot,
It
but
looks like a lot.
it's really like 600 square feet being added total.
Correct. So I'll say it's a net 600 added.
Yeah.
Any questions on the gymnasium? Otherwise, everything else in the ed spec is as it is in the ed spec for physical education. Maintenance operations, we had a few changes. The maintenance storage was programmed at 240 square feet, but we learned that, and that was allocated for on-site maintenance equipment like lawnmowers, snow blowers, things like that. And we learned that the lawnmowers are stored at the Board of Ed central storage facility, so we could reduce that. And we basically just allocated that change in area from maintenance storage to the receiving area, so that the 140 reduction got moved to a receiving area so that the building had a proper receiving area. And then bulk equipment storage was programmed in the ed spec as a 14 by 14 room. That's what's driving the 196. It's kind of an oddball number. But we added 150 square feet to that in talking with Mike Lynch because of the way that materials are received at the facility in bulk quantity. We need to make sure that there was enough storage area to accommodate that. And then the cubby and backpack storage, that 963 square feet, again, another strange number, is driven off of our experience for an area per student for a cubby and or locker. And we wanted to account for that in the general building gross up, because we can either put those in the corridors or we can put them in the classroom. And as we make those decisions going through the design phase, that space will get distributed throughout the building. So that 963 square feet is not one space. It's just a space allocation that will be distributed throughout the building in some fashion, whether it's in the corridors or in the classrooms. But we did not want to take away from the classroom area to account for cubbies if you wanted to go that route. You want to count that space separately. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the lobby. The lobby was not numerically accounted for in the ed spec, but it was narratively discussed. And we wanted to make sure that we carried a value for that. And 800 square feet is pretty typical for a building this size for that function. And again, it may not be in one location. That 800 square foot allocation may get distributed. Say maybe 2/3 becomes the front end, the main entrance, but you may have a small secondary entrance for the assembly wing of the building where you have a gym and a cafeteria, for example. So that may get broken up that way. You may have a smaller secondary lobby. Any questions on that? So I did put a summary line on the bottom. It's a little bit, the summary of the ed spec total and the final program total is kind of are kind of oddball numbers because they don't really tie to anything. It's just summing up the values of things that changed.
Right.
So really the final column, the 3565 number, is really the net add to the space program.
And even then, Kemp, the adding of the cubby space is kind of either goes in the classrooms or it goes in the hallway, right?
Correct.
It's sort of like.
And we'll make those decisions as we go through the
We got the
design.
design phase, right?
If you look at it from like an occupancy standpoint, gross square footage divided by attended occupants and everything, is there any kind of outliers or any benchmarking tests that your firm can do to just make sure that we're not off the rails in the sense of like the big picture?
Yes, actually, we did that throughout the program
process.
verification process. Amy, our program planner, is constantly referencing everything back to benchmarks from past projects that we've done. So we've been within the range on all the areas. And it is a range. Typically, the benchmark is going to be, depending on the space, it'll be a range of X number of square feet per seat is typically how we track it. We've done a lot of projects for a lot of districts, so we try and narrow it to more of a peer set of districts for Darien. So we're not comparing against non-peer districts.
Where does it sit on the range? High end, low
I'd
end?
have to pull up some other slides, but I think we're right in the middle, if not maybe slightly higher than the middle in most cases.
Which might be good for expansion
Yeah.
in a sense.
And as I mentioned earlier, the seat count, and actually we can jump to that if you're interested in looking at that. This was an analysis that we did where when we were challenging the number of classrooms, and this is where we ended up. So I was a little off in the numbers I said earlier. So we ended up with 18 classrooms with 24 seats. Actually, no, that's not correct, because we had 900 square feet. So, but still, you're going to be based on the 24 seats. So this net square feet per seat is going to go up. But the 33 is our benchmark. So you're going to be a little bit higher than the benchmark in the classrooms. But you have a total of 432 seats at something more like 37 net per student. for a total enrollment 1 through 5 of 360 students. So you have this many seats for this many students, possibly more if you had a bubble that you had to put more than 24 students into the classroom. So you have built-in capacity into the overall building. So if you do have those bubbles, you can accommodate those.
If I can, part of that conversation included our class size policy. So we have grade levels which can't go from a district policy, they can't go up to 26. So that also was part of the discussion as we did this.
Correct, thanks, Terry. So we looked at it a bunch of different ways. 20 at 900, 15 at 860, but we landed on 18 at 900, not the 800. So that's why I didn't have this on the deck, because it was more of a working slide. But that's how we arrived at those numbers.
Where are you going to get pushback from the state? Because this is significantly bigger than the standard.
Hopefully we're not going to get too much pushback. I think when we had our pre-meeting, they were pretty much on board with where we were. But if we were going to get any pushback, it would be the number of seats for the number of students. Yeah. The size of the rooms
In the regular classrooms.
in the regular classrooms.
Right, because I mean, mixing in the ELP and then the district-wide special ed creates a different picture, I would think.
It does.
Yep.
And that's why it was important to take those two from here and shift them to the special ed, because that's,
Right.
then you're dedicating them to that program, and that will help that argument. While we're on these detail slides, I thought I'd just touch base on the Library Media Center, because this is the way we broke it down. We have an 880 square foot area for stacks, and then we have this library creation exploration zone. I don't like using the term makerspace because I think it's overused at this point. But it's kind of, think of it that way. It's kind of this exploration space where a lot of different things can happen. It can be programmed a lot of different ways. And it's a classroom that's schedulable by anybody, and it can be used in a variety of different ways. These are just the support functions. So the associated storage with that space, because as you make projects, you need to store them somewhere. And then we have an office and a storage room for the books and workroom for repairing books and so forth. And that's pretty standard stuff for a school like this. This is where we are moving toward the future, in my opinion, where we have this distributed learning commons space that is going to be throughout the building. And here's a sample program or a sample layout where these grays would be a neighborhood of classrooms for, say, a grade level. And then the small green piece is where you would have some of that distributed learning corridor type space where you have a breakout reading space that's out in an enlarged corridor. And this is an image of how that may work. So that being the classroom behind, and then you have this space out in the corridor space, but it's outside the classroom. Any of the classrooms can use it. They bring 2 classrooms worth of students together to use it outside of the classroom. So it just gives you a lot of flexibility. And there's a lot of material out there on YouTube for different schools that have been designed. And actually there's one, I'll have to send it to you. Amy particularly likes it because it's from the student's perspective. So they interviewed the elementary students about why they liked the kind of destination space that's not in the classroom. Sometimes it can be a reward function. If students are performing higher, they get a reward by being able to go to the painting zone or whatever it may be, and they just engages them that much more. So I think it's going to be a very positive step for this design. Any other discussion on the details? Because that's essentially what I have to present to you as a summary of our programming effort. Now that we've got the program set, we're ready to dive into the design phase. One other thing that we're doing, if you want to close the programming piece first, then we can talk about an update on the design process. But we are moving toward selecting an approach for the design. And so I'll leave it at that. That's our next step, and then once we decide on the approach, we're going to then move into schematic design and the rest of the design phases.
Well, what we want to do this morning is have the committee decide to recommend either all or some of the ed spec changes that we've outlined here to the Board of Education to consider to modify them so that we can then go forward. So is there any more discussion concerning what the committee would like to do with regard to the recommended changes from SLIC? Is there a motion to adopt them all to recommend? Rusty? Second? All in favor of that? Okay. So we will basically forward your changes as a recommendation from our committee to be considered by the Board of Education to modify the ed specs, which we'll do sometime, I gather, later this month or September.
Yeah, so if you, at some point, we can talk offline, can you just give me what timeline you need? Our next regular meeting is the 27th. If that timeline needs to be increased, let me know.
We would like to, we originally told the state office, school construction and grant review, whatever it's called, Office of School Construction Grant and Review, that we would be back to them so they could meet with Mr. Adderley in late August, but I think early September is early enough so that if you, but we would like to go back, I'm sure you'd like to go back with, here are the final ed specs, rather than in between. So I think August, late August is fine.
Okay.
And
If
then-
we meet prior to that, I will make sure this is on the agenda, but certainly it will be on the agenda for the 27th.
And we'll give you our full committee motion with all that.
Great.
Okay? Great. I did want to add one thing, because I was asked last time to check with the fire marshal about the gymnasium. And he said, when you have children sitting on the floor, you obviously don't occupy as much space. He said his only thought would be, when you design the gymnasium, and if you're intending to use it for a full school meeting, design it with two exits and have them be double doors each. And he said that's really the only concern that he would have as a fire marshal.
Okay. Typically, when we design a space like this, we'll put 3, if not 4.
Okay.
And so that will be covered.
Two double doors is what he was saying would be great. Okay?
Excellent.
Great. Our next item is just to give us give the group a quick overview of what we've been doing in the area of siting,
Sure.
and phasing of construction.
So we've been working with the design review group to analyze 2 primary approaches to a new building on the site. One is a new building essentially in the open space, which is currently the field, and it actually encroaches around the corner a little bit and has a little bit of overlap with the existing building. That's one option, and then the other option is one that sits more on top of the existing building, which would be a phased demolition and construction project, more so than the one that is built on the open space. And so we are working through some of those details. We're working with ONGAP to identify the best approach for construction with that phasing. And we've asked the committee to have a decision for that by the middle of August, so we can then take the schematic and the full design process forward on one approach. We don't want to move forward with 2 approaches. We just need to move forward with the one. So we have another meeting today to continue that discussion, and I believe we're going to have another one on the 13th.
It's a
And
tentative
that
date,
will
yeah.
help facilitate a decision by the 15th. That's our current objective. From that point on, once we have the decision, our schematic design effort will start, and that's about an 8-week process. And then for the design process, then it has about a 2 to 3 week estimating period. Then we'll have the numbers based on a design. We'll ask for approval from the committee at that point in time to to move into the next phase of design development. And that will march forward with a similar timeline.
And we'll go back to the state after the schematic and estimates are put together.
Correct.
Do we have to get their approval before we step into the design development phase?
We do not. We typically just want their buy-in with how things are moving forward. They
Okay.
may have comments to us and
Right.
things to consider, but it's more of a touch base rather than an approval. The approval for bidding comes at the end after our construction documents are complete.
At what point do you loop in the construction team into seeing how all this comes together?
Now.
Now?
It's already happened.
They're engaged the whole
Penny's
way
here.
There's
through.
one back there.
David.
Move up, Dave. Come
I'm
on.
looking back there now.
Just come on.
Dave, wear your hard hat next to him.
Yeah, thanks.
Dusty boots if you want.
Dusty boots, that's
Looking
right.
for- Looking for a picture.
At our last design review meeting, Dave was in attendance, and a big component of the discussion was reviewing the schedule in a lot of detail. And he provided tremendous feedback to all the schemes we're looking at in terms of constructability, cost, phasing. So we're
Because
incorporating.
phasing is critical to
Yeah,
any
right.
of these
we're incorporating
designs.
that.
Oops, thank you.
And at that meeting as well, we spent some time with Jeremy Ginsberg, and he discussed presented to us the MU zoning once again, and discussed the different approvals we're going to need to get with the town. So that was very helpful to inform both SLAM and AG and AP and O&G as to what the different what the timeline is going to be with regard to approvals. So.
I think Jeremy was a little bit optimistic, thinking we were going to be going for a November approval, so I think that the schedule that David's put together is more realistic, talking about January, which is probably where we'll be, which we'll discuss in just a moment.
I agree.
And the one other topic we had at that meeting, we discussed putting together, that SLAM was going to put together a website for the project. If I could offer a little encouragement to get that started soon, because we're feeling that maybe that could help us with the distribution of information to the committee as far as what's happening at the smaller design review subcommittee meetings. And we were hoping maybe we could sort of set up a regular plan to post the agenda prior to the meetings for everybody's availability, and possibly get meeting minutes soon after each meeting so that the whole committee can be informed about what's going on, as well as present the slides for that meeting, just to keep the committee in particular abreast of that information.
Right. Thanks for reminding me of that, Diane. It is a password-protected website, so each of you as committee members would have your own username login, but you'll be able to access all the documents as they are developed.
And we want to put some of them on the town website as well.
Correct. Yeah, there'll be a component of the website that'll be accessible by the public.
Well, we'll put them on
and then-
the town website.
Right, and we can take those documents that
Right.
and put them on the town website, exactly.
Are
So
there
yeah,
any-
if we can get that set up soon, that would
I'll
be,
get that set
that
up.
would kind of help us, I think, with our internal communication and sharing the knowledge that we're learning along the way.
Sure. Yeah, I'll get that set up this week.
Anything else in this matter right now? All right, Dave? Pull up a chair. There is I sent out to you all Dave's email about the schedule. We have color prints of the schedule here because it's almost impossible to read.
I do have it, if you want to put up on, I can put up on the screen if that's,
That'd be great.
sure. Is there an HDMI or
I did have
VGA?
an HDMI.
I have a VGA adapter too.
Oh, you do?
I do, let me just grab that.
My HDMI port is 25 feet long.
Are you worried?
This schedule will basically, 3 copies. Anybody else need a copy? In color?
I'll take them.
I have a copy in color if you want a copy in color.
Very well.
It's easier to read in color. That's why. We have some more copies here in color.
Not more on this side, but-
We have more copies. Oh, yeah, take one big copy.
Yes.
Here. Okay. All right. So Dave, as I understand, this is kind of what we're going to be using from now on in terms of our whole project management.
Yes, so for those that I haven't met yet, I'm Dave Cravenzola. I'm the project executive on behalf of the ONG AP joint venture. So I'll be coming to all these meetings throughout the course of the project from start to finish. So yeah, so as part of our role is to make sure that the overall project schedule is tracked, forecasted, and upheld throughout the project. So what we've done is we've set up a structure for the project that's grouped by the type of activity, and the idea is to put the tasks for all the facets, whether it's a town approval, what the building committee has to take action on, design facets, and then as we get into construction, we'll develop the actual construction activities into, you know, what's 3 or 4 lines now will evolve into its own several hundred activity schedule. But really the main goal now is to look at things from an overall planning perspective. So as this schedule is what will be presented to the building committee, it'll be in our monthly report that'll come to the committee, and it'll be discussed at each of the meetings. So I just want to take a couple minutes and explain to you how it works so that you can interpret the information yourself. So what will happen again is there's always groupings. What we do is we put milestones at the top of the schedule, and those are just quick snapshots. They represent a date and time when something of importance either starts or finishes. So if you we'll be populating that with things like occupancy dates, start of construction, this design phase started, this design phase completed, so that in a quick snapshot you can see where things are without having to dive into pages of information. And we can populate that with dates as any of the stakeholders really care to see. Then getting into the pre-construction efforts, which really that's what the schedule is primarily based upon now, is getting us to the point of where we're ready to put a shovel in the ground. So we've outlined a series of activities that have to be done as far as contract awards. So what happens is each activity has its own identification, which is over here, 610, 620. We also put lines on the side markers, so if anyone ever has a question, you can say, oh, line 29, I have a question about this, or you can refer to it like that. And then we state what the duration is that's planned for each. So in this instance, it's 20 days, 10, 15. At this point, we deal with things in usually 5-day increments, which represent one week is 5 working days. We then provide what the expected start date is, and based upon the duration, what the expected finish date is. And if you ever see something with an A on it, it just means that has actually taken place. That is something that has actually started or has actually finished. Moving over slightly on the screen is a dark blue line. That's the date that the information is good as of, is when it was last updated. And you'll see that right on the schedule on the bottom. We always say what the date is, so you always know how current that information is. So the information on the schedule was updated on Friday the 26th.
What, you didn't talk about a column called float.
Oh yes, I'll get to that
Total
one.
float.
I'll get to that one, yep.
Don't worry about things like that.
Yeah, so we sometimes we share this, sometimes we don't. I think in the situation we're in here, it's beneficial to everyone to share that, because we put logic into the schedule and we say this has to happen before this happens, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it has to happen right then and there. So we deal with something called float, and that's the amount of time that you have to complete that activity before it starts affecting the completion of the project.
Okay.
So, we have some items that we've identified already as far as the, awarding contracts to the commissioning agent or things like that. And you see varying days. Some things, like the peer review contract, there's 140 days that we have to take action on that item. Whereas, going down to the conceptual design, there are 0 days in float. And you see that item, that activity is in red. So if you ever, at a quick glance, want to know what the most important things are to be done on the project, look for the red activities, or look for the ones with 0 float.
Why would you plan things with such high float? And, it's, for example, something with 150 days of float, it means you could do it 130 days from now.
Right, so say for instance, right, so if you look for instance at the peer review contract or the special inspections coordinator contract, those are lines 28, 29, and 30. The thing with that is that we're saying that, okay, once the building committee solicits for the contract to bring on, say, the commissioning agent, which is important, another thing that the committee has to do is hire a special inspections coordinator. So it can happen after that, but it doesn't have to be done until construction actually starts on site. So while we're showing it happening there, if something changes and it doesn't get awarded for another 3 months, that's perfectly fine. And you'll see, as we report on that. If something was not critical but is now approaching near critical,
Okay.
we communicate that to make sure that decisions are made without affecting the schedule. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, kind of. I think it's also just, hey, the sooner you know who all the players are, the better, right?
Mhm.
Even though it's maybe not mission critical.
Right.
So is that float from today or from the
It's
start
float
of
in
that task?
It's basically, it's float in reference to the date that it's shown. So we're saying that,
The
say, the
start.
peer review contract should start as early as November 1st, but be completed by November 29th. But from that point, it can move 140 days.
From the estimated completion date.
Right.
Okay.
And not affect the schedule.
Okay.
Now, obviously, as other activities, so say if a series of activities finish sooner, then it changes that too, where something may have had 20 days. If you finish something else 10 days sooner, it'll say, well, you now have 10 days on that because you've accelerated some other work.
Okay.
Dave, would it be possible to designate the A column sort of as a color? I mean, I think visually it might be valuable to somehow designate those things that have started.
Yeah, well, and they are, it's, anything that has started is colored in blue.
In
On the bar,
On the
not
bar.
in the
Oh, I was
text.
going to say in
Yes,
the
it's in the
text. I was
bar.
talking about in the text, but okay, in the bar. I see.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
what happens too is what we'll likely do in time is when we provide updates, we'll filter it so that things that are already done and over with,
Disappear.
they just come off the list because in time, you're not going to want to be thumbing
Clutter.
through a 20-page schedule. You're going to want to see
course.
what are we currently doing and what's forecasted.
Okay.
But you do have a historical model then when you're all done.
Absolutely, and we do, when needed, we do, baseline comparisons. We can compare the schedule as it was today to the schedule that we're going to have in 6 months, and,
Okay.
yep.
I'm just thinking that at the end of the project, we have an audit, here's how long it took, here's what,
Absolutely, right.
Yeah.
Yep, with every activity. So
Okay.
like I said, this schedule here has maybe 130 activities, and when we're done, it'll probably be about 1,000 activity schedule, is my guess.
Wonderful.
So,
Something to look forward to.
again, and it's really an agenda. I mean, as far as the committee's concerned, it's really just, what are the decisions that need to be made? How's the process going? Are we on track? Are we not on track? So we can make educated decisions about correcting the course if something comes up.
How do you tell who's responsible for each of these?
We assign responsibilities, and we can put that column in here to say whether it's whether it's
Town or-
the building committee, the town, SLAM, OGAP.
Or independent contractor or
Exactly.
somebody.
Yeah, we'll
I
do
would
like
like-
other or something for the catch-all of the other things.
I'd
We
like
can-
to see that.
If that's something.
Yeah. Sort of like the chart that you did for the state, right, different colors. It doesn't matter, you do with colors if you want.
It's,
Whatever.
it would be and what we could actually do is, when you provide that, we could also do a schedule that's simply grouped by that person.
Yeah.
So if you say, all right, I want to know all the things that the building committee has to take action on from now to the end of the project, as we populate it, we could filter it that way for you. So,
Great.
so.
Okay, so this is something that obviously each committee member should look at and understand, so that it gives us an idea where we're going, what we got to do. Excellent.
And, right, and there's, we print it without showing the relationship lines, because when you show all the relationship lines, there's lines that go everywhere, and that's the logic that we put into the schedule based upon our past experience of what has to happen
Right.
before and after something. So, you know, we could share that, but again, it makes viewing the schedule pretty difficult.
Question. When it comes to the various, I guess it's the second page, which is town approvals, Randy is going to pretty much spearhead that. I mean, he won't be alone doing it, but I'm just saying he's going to, as he knows dates change, or who does he contact to make sure this gets updated? You guys?
Yes,
Okay, so basically, the communication has got to get to your office.
yes. And most of those things, if there are meetings about the approval process, and we would actually like to be part of those discussions as well.
Sure. But just
Like,
saying-
in putting this together last week, I did spend some time on the phone with Jeremy Ginsburg to get further clarification to what he came in here on. And these activities here related to the application process and what has to happen with the relationship of ZBA versus P&Z and the Architectural Review Board. Jeremy walked me through that, so that what we have in here now is what I believe needs to happen as far as the approval process, and then the application deadlines. You know, ZBA is very specific about saying that they need that application a month before their meeting. So, as you had mentioned, if we did, I did put in the actual meeting dates from the calendar, but based on their January
Based on their
meetings.
calendar,
Yep,
yes. Okay.
and, you know, between pages 2 and 3 is where those dates are, and you'll see there too is that the key is to get the approval before we go to the PCR at the state. So, you know, we'll look at that, and there, you know, if it looks like something misses and we have to go to the February, we'll click it over to the February dates. But what we're aiming for now is to meet the January meeting dates for the town authorities.
Great.
On your third page, town square concept were already critical.
Well, yeah, because because there's always a critical path. So that's because that's the longest duration of construction is, and like I said, we didn't update the construction durations after our very last meeting when we talked a little bit. I figure we get between today and know a little more about what is it we're actually building, because if we're able to build it in one phase, it's a vast difference than doing it over the course of 3 or 4 phases. So,
Understood.
you know, I ask that you not overanalyze or get concerned about what you see on the construction of things, because they're really just big placeholders at this point.
Got it.
So, are there any other questions?
Sorry if you said this already, but if you wanted to just distill this into a critical path model, could you do that?
You could sort it by...
Zap it.
Well, and you could sort it by criticality, so it would be grouped to activities with 0 or negative float, and then it would be, you know, the next near critical activities, so you could see them prioritizing.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, there's...
But eliminating the ones that are kind of ancillary, and, you know,
Yeah, you could...
if you just wanted to strip this down to the ones that are
Yes.
of utmost importance, key
Oh, yeah.
deadlines, all that.
Yeah, I mean, there's truly an immense amount of information that's in the schedule.
Yeah.
And flexibility. Should say now.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, the key is just, you know, accurate accurate entry and just constant monitoring of it. I mean, that's really what's going to make it successful. It's not, you know.
So the bottom line is, information concerning any of these specifics that we know about ought to go back to your department to put into the model. Okay, the schedule. Okay.
And again, at all the meetings that we're at, you know, it's the first piece of paper I pull out.
Is it important that there's a member of our committee who is kind of the liaison on the schedule, or is it?
It's too many different parts, because, I mean, for example, if Randy's working on town approval matters, and you're working on, I don't know, design matters, I mean,
It's
whoever's
important, just each
working
person
on it.
should be.
It's really an overall committee communication tool is what it is. It's,
And anybody from our ex officio members, bring in information, please, that we need, you know, I mean, anything.
right, like you said, you know, we added more activities when we met 2 weeks ago.
Yep.
Right? If something comes up today, that's, you know, I mean, since I even published this one, you know, I added a couple more activities related to, you know, when we're going to come up with the actual phasing plans. So it's.
So Dave's our coordinator, and he's the one. He takes it all in.
At the end,
Sounds good.
at the end of the day, there's one entity that you're going to be looking at that doesn't open on time. So we'd like to have that. We'd like to have that say and control from the beginning. So.
That's great. Any more questions about the schedule and how it works? Okay, great. Noting on the schedule, something about contracts here, small float dates, the update on our status of our
Contracts?
contracts.
We finally have the contract for SLAM ready for Kemp to review with me. There's still questions and stuff, but I just gave him a hard copy, and he'll get the electronic copy today. The general conditions contract will go out probably tomorrow. So those two big ones are underway.
Great.
AP, I've talked to this week. We'll start with that next week.
You got 4 float days.
We got a lot of float dates on that.
No, you got 4 float days
Ugly.
after the 19th of August. Okay. All right. Well, I'm looking at the schedule for you.
Calendar days.
Calendar, 5 business days.
Yeah.
You got those dates, Dave?
Of course, we're going to put our the award of our contract on the critical path. I mean, come on. Like,
0 float.
I see that.
-10.
Then we get about 120-day float on that contract.
We have any other matters to talk about? I know that we should hire a commissioning agent.
Let me tell you where we are on it.
Okay.
Okay. Commissioning agent is mandatory.
Right.
And I have got sample, we have to do an RFP.
We do have to.
We have to do an RFP. So I've got a couple of sample RFPs, and we'll be drafting it, not by the end of this week, by the end of next week. And we'll speak to Kate, because we have to post it on the DAS website, and we have to put an ad in the newspaper. We've already identified at least 3 of the best ones in the state, and hopefully all 3, I'm sure one, Collier, will be submitting. So we know who we're looking for, and we're going to make it a very tight timeline, because this is very, very, very simple, actually. So.
For the public audience, commissioning agents required by the state, basically to ensure that the high-performance building standards are met, which is required by the state building. So, while it's a good idea to have one anyway, it's a requirement now of a school contract. We're going to meet shortly after this meeting is done. At least I am, with Mike Lynch, and maybe Rusty can join us, talking about setting up a process for approving invoices and getting them paid. And then we have to work through just exactly from they get paid, and then how do they eventually get into the state. And I think you have a computer system at the Board of Education, or a model that feeds that stuff in, because the district has to provide the information, the town can, but it's all about a coordination and approval process. And in that same venue, we're going to be talking about okay, we don't have the whole committee approving every invoice, we can have certain levels approved by one or two people, or two people, whatever, so that we can move this along relatively. We're going to be meeting right after this to go over that. Mike Lynch has put together a timeline, a historical timeline, and I will distribute it to everybody after this meeting with, get your input back. We're trying to keep track of all the key events that have occurred so that we don't have to go back and say, well, did we actually get that approval, or did we actually do this, or when did we do that? And I will distribute that to everybody electronically. So if you've got additional inputs to put into the history, and we've got it through the end of, I think it's just July, isn't it, Mike? Or June, or whatever.
End of June.
End of June. And we'll update it each month. Throw your comments back and we'll get it.
And if those are dates that you would like memorialized in the schedule, we can put them in there too, so they're there for posterity.
Well, these are like, really like what we hired, we put out RFP for the architects, how many came back, when we had we interviewed 6, we chose 3, we had a charrette, and then,
narrative.
and it just sort of, bullet points, but here's what we did, so that everyone says, well, how did you go about the process? Also, when we got authorization and appropriation, $3 million appropriation, and appropriation and authorization for bonding, then we had a $60 million add-on. I want the dates of that. Those are in there, when Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance, and RTM all approved it. So we can go back and say, yep, these were all done, and we don't have to go back and do it again. It's just merely keeping a log of what we did, not as in much detail.
Okay.
I'm not going to put down when we hire the commissioning agent. No. Anything else?
Yes. One quick thing. We have had a change in the construction management team. Laura Purcell, if you remember, during the interview process, was the construction manager. Unfortunately, a couple of the jobs that she has been working on have been extended, and it's not possible for her to jump on board when we need her, which is pretty much now. Dave and company have selected Dan Hetzler, who couldn't be here today, but will meet in the future as the new pre-construction manager. Dave has 24 years of experience, 15...
Dan.
Dan, 15 years with O&G, and I've been promised by Dave that this at least is equal to what we had, if not an upgrade. So I just wanted you to know that, because you will see a new face here next time.
Well, my face will remain. For better or for worse. I'll let you judge that.
And we're also going to, on Monday, the Board of Selectmen will be approving 2 additions to the building committee. Their names are Sean Brown and Nick Rongo. Both have construction experience. Nick had 16 years with Turner Construction, has been working with CBRE in the building management area. And then Sean Brown has been on the Architectural Review Board for 18 years. But he has a lot of construction background and management of projects. Right now he's in the security business, very lucrative business. And they'll be joining us hopefully at our next meeting. So basically, we're trying to bring on some more people that have expertise in the actual construction management area, because when it gets busy, somebody can always be on, some of the people can be on site. Nick works locally, he works in Sanford. We know where Rusty is. And then Sean, while he travels a lot, I think his office also is nearby. That's all I have.
I'd like to say thanks to Dave and Kemp for being here today, and to the Kemp's team, SLAM team, for all their hard work on the programming aspect of the project. It was all very clear and gave us great guidance, and we're thankful that you guys brought the knowledge you had about schools. I think it really improved the project and kind of set us
Thank you.
well in the next step, so thank you for that.
Here, here. All right, our next meeting will be August
One more
15th.
comment?
I'm sorry.
Good morning, everybody. I can sign this out offline, but the last couple of meetings I just had, I didn't have the opportunity to discuss or review it, what the security provisions are for the school, the design of it, and so on and so forth. So if you have it, somebody can direct me where to, what form to have that discussion or review that process. And then, I don't know if Michelle or Costa required any other action. Typically, they do with the board through the revision of the specs, but I didn't know they required any action on the board of selectmen. I know in other districts they've done that, but that's just a check before you go back. Yeah, they're just.
We took all the steps required at the RTM level
Yeah, okay.
to make sure we complied with our state grant application.
Sometimes when ed specs are reviewed or modified again, like go back to, there's another re-roll that sometimes takes place because they've changed some of these. But anyway, we can check it. It's a simple check.
Okay.
I can respond to the security design. We will be having security meetings as part of the design process, so you'll be engaged in that, because ultimately at the state level, it's the superintendent's responsibility to put that plan forward,
Right.
and so we'll have those conversations.
And your consultant is D'Agostino?
Yes.
Seems to be everybody's consultant.
Right.
In this area. Got a lock on it. Okay. Any other questions? Motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
So be it. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.